All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Batschelet. I'm a software engineer here with Adobe in Austin. And let me share my screen. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the changes that we have added to ECE-Tools versions 2002 1.1 and 2002 1.2. So first of all, let's talk about some of the compatibility updates we've made. So ECE-Tools is now fully compatible and tested with PHP 7.4. We also now support MariaDB versions up to 10.4, as well as versions of Elasticsearch version 7. Which version of these software your particular site is going to be compatible with is going to depend upon what version of Magento your site is running. So I encourage you to take a look at the software compatibility version matrix on our DevDoc site to see what versions of the software you should use. But rest assured that ECE-Tools is now compatible with these versions. In addition, we have added some more data to our service end-of-life validators. So we've added some newer versions of MariaDB, Elasticsearch, and Redis to that validator so that you can be confident that whatever version of those tools you use, you won't be in an end-of-life status with them and potentially risk any kind of PCI compliance issues related to that. We've updated our validator for the autoload section of Composer.json. Some of you may be aware the Zen framework has renamed itself to Laminus, and so there's a corresponding change that you must make to the autoload section for that Laminus namespace. And so we've updated our validator of that area in order to be compatible with either version of that namespace, depending upon what version of the framework you currently have installed. We've updated our handling of the env PHP file during the deployment phase. And so now, if that file is missing for some reason, ECE-Tools can attempt to generate it using some of the environment data that is available to it. If, however, the file is missing and ECE-Tools cannot determine what your crypt key should be, it will emit an error letting you know that that crypt key is missing and that the deployment cannot proceed. These are generally situations that would be a site down situation kind of regardless of what ECE-Tools did here. But we are giving better error messaging and information about the specific problem so that you can more easily diagnose it and resolve it. Speaking of error codes, this is kind of a big one. We've gone through our code and added specific error codes to every single one of the warnings and errors that ECE-Tools may generate. And in the case of errors, we use those codes as the exit status for ECE-Tools if it needs to end prematurely for some reason. So that's kind of useful for anybody who's using ECE-Tools in a continuous integration environment where that exit code might be useful for them in order to determine what the root cause was and how to possibly resolve it. As you can see from this table, these codes are roughly segmented out based upon their severity as well as what phase of the deployment process they came from. So errors from the build phase are all less than 100. Errors from the deployment phase are in the 100 to 200 range. In the post-deploy and more general errors have a little bit of an overlap in the 200 range. And then warnings are in the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 ranges, all respectively. We've also added some new logging around those errors. So we've created a new log file located at var log cloud.error.log. And this is a filtered log file for all the messages from ECE-Tools that are at the level of warning or above. So that's your warning, error, critical, etc. As of the latest version of ECE-Tools, these messages are also JSON formatted. So again, this is geared towards people who are maybe using this in a CI/CD pipeline or who are doing any kind of log aggregation off of their site. We've made these messages easy for them to be machine parsable and readable and get data out to you in order to diagnose any kind of errors or warnings that came up. So let's take take a look at an example of one of these messages, you can see we have the error code included. And I know from that previous slide that errors in the 2000 range are warnings from the deployment phase. I also know that because that information is also included within the JSON structure. We also include the specific step during the deployment scenario where this error occurred, so you can kind of narrow this down to a very specific spot in the process. We have the error message itself. In this case, it is relating to the PHP version of Magento 2.4.0 that I'm using. And then lastly, almost all of the errors and warnings that ECE-Tools generate now include a suggestion. And so that is included in our JSON file as well. And so this will give you a little bit of in-context information about how to possibly resolve any of these errors or warnings as they come up and help you to more easily diagnose and resolve them in a quick manner. Some other smaller improvements that I wanted to kind of touch on real briefly. We have reordered when patches get applied during the build process. So patches will now be applied to your site almost at the very beginning of the build process. This is in order to resolve some issues we had around compiling the DI XML file if those patches hadn't been added. We've added a new Redis backend variable. This variable can be used in order to configure what backend model Magento should use for connecting to Redis, and I encourage you to look at the dev docs for more information about that variable and what values it will accept. We've added the option for some more verbose output when you're running the config dump, the config import, or the module enable commands, so you can get some more details about what's happening when you run those. And lastly, we've added some more explicit warnings when you're running the database dump command from ECE-Tools. And specifically, we'll give you more clearer warnings that this will temporarily put your site into maintenance mode while that dump is occurring. Before I finish, I wanted to give a quick shout out to a handful of folks whose code was contributed to these two releases. So in particular, I wanted to thank Matthew Bean, Daniel Falk, and Barney Shergold. Thank you so much for your contributions to these releases. And of course, thank you to everybody within the community for helping to support ECE-Tools and to improve it over time. Lastly, some additional resources for what I covered here. These are all links to our DevDocs site. And so if you want some more details about what was included in these releases or any release of ECE-Tools, I encourage you to look at our release notes page. If you want to look at more details on what versions ECE-Tools and Magento, what versions of other software ECE-Tools and Magento are compatible with, I encourage you to look at that service version compatibility matrix. We also now have a page on the DevDocs site that lists out all of the error codes that ECE-Tools will generate, as well as the message that goes along with them. So if for whatever reason you just have the error code from your CI/CD pipeline, you can go to this page and see what the actual message and underlying condition was. This page also includes all of those suggestions that I mentioned. And so again, you have some immediate help for how to help potentially resolve that, that error or warning and get your site back up more quickly. Lastly, as I said, we have a link to the Redis backend variable. I encourage you to look at that in order to see what values it accepts and how it may be useful for you in terms of configuring the backend model for your Magento site. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I know it was a brief session, but appreciate everybody coming out. Are there any questions I could answer?
Looks like we're good. Thanks, Ben, for presenting, and we'll be sharing the recording as always on our page where we track all the demos. So if you have any questions later, please just contact any of us or ping Ben on the Slack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.